We're going to move directly to the presentation by Tova Ganzel, which is a similar theme. Professor Tova Ganzel is the head of the School in Basic Jewish Studies, as well as a professor of Jewish Studies at our university. She's published extensively books on Ezekiel and more recently on the post-exilic period. And she's going to speak to us about identity in exile, Judean names. This is a concluding presentation to our session on names. Professor Ganzel, please.
In the coming minutes, I want to look at the Judeans under Persian rule and explore the ways in which their identity developed and changed. Cuneiform evidence, including Marashu documents and the Al Yehuda archive, indicate that Judeans in Babylonia occupied a range of statuses, from Shoshanus to farmers and landowners. Moreover, we find that Judeans across the empire had ties to the Persian rulers. Yet the Judeans, while aware of their surroundings, also appear to have maintained their identity as differentiated, or as a differentiated group. Indirect evidence, what I'll do now is try to go a little fast forward and just show the evidence and not lay it out. Indirect evidence in the Al Yehuda tablets makes it clear that the community of Judean exiles was very involved in its surroundings. Judeans merchants integrated into the commercial sphere of Babylonian and Persian society. Textual evidence indicates that the Babylonian temples were also economic centers. They raised taxes, owned land, slaves, and livestock, took part in trade, and involved in a wide range of workers and personnel. Some Judeans may have been directly employed by these temples. Jan sitting here is an expert on that, while others held jobs providing temples with supplies or marketing surplus. Babylonian kings donated a few deportees and other spoils of war to the temples, but no Judean individuals, at least to my best knowledge, can be identified in the documents as having been donated to a temple. However, in many cases it remains unclear whether a Judean person identified in records was hired or dependent by the temple. And here you can see a list that Jan put together for a forthcoming article, and I want to thank you for that. While some Judeans were classified as Shoshanus, others oversaw Shoshanus who were expected to work the land, and that they were assigned and could be used in forced labor. Okay, I'm not going to go into Yigal's tablet of an example of that. I'm going to skip it, but Yigal published one example of that. Many Judeans in Ahmadian Babylonia were most likely farmers. Some exiled Judeans were treated favorably, obtaining recognition as officials and actively participating in local administration. Cuneiform documents reveal direct contact between Judeans and the Persian bureaucracy. And here you can see the examples. Some Judeans we find are integrated into Persian administrative networks and recognized by imperial officials. Judeans identified by name also held official bureaucratic titles. How do you say that? Bureaucratic titles. And here you can see their names. Again, I'm skipping, going through the list. Thus it appears that Judeans living in Judah and in Babylonia had ties with the Persian rulers, and that some experienced social mobility. So now to the names. Judean interactions with the Persian Empire are only one part of the equation. The question of Judean identity took on renewed urgency in the years under Babylonian rule, beginning with the exile of Joachim, intensifying after the destruction of the temple, and continuing into the Persian period. In the wake of the geographic displacement and crisis, naming practices, and here I'm tying on and where Yigal ended, became a key site of cultural negotiation. And this is basically what I want to say. These names, often charged with meaning, reveal both continuity with the past and new models of expressing hope, loyalty, and belonging. Given the fluidity of the evidence, conclusions about Persian period Judean naming practices must remain tentative. So it's been here said a couple of times today that current counts identify roughly 100 to 120 distant Judeans in the Persian period records, including names in the Marashu and Al Yehuda after the Edict of Cyrus, and over 400 in the Neo-Babylonian sources from 590 to 539. As we all know, definitions of Judean vary and are complicated by factors such as intermarriage. Moreover, the corpus is incomplete. Peter was saying that there's more to be published, so here we go with unpublished and undiscovered documents likely to expand it. Any patterns noted here should therefore be understood based on the data currently available. The last article which I based the information on is Kathleen Abraham's article. For the returnees in particular, identity was not merely symbolic, it was foundational. The texts in Ezra and Nehemiah reflect a belief that verifiable genealogies were essential for claiming roles within the restored community. Participation in temple service, eligibility for land, and inclusion in civic records all depended on demonstrable lineage. In this context, names function not only as personal or familial identifiers, but as markers of communal legitimacy. The appearance of new names, many absent from earlier biblical texts, and that's what I'm going to try to demonstrate, names that we find first in the biblical records from the Babylonian exile and further on, can be seen to underscore a shifting worldview shaped by loss, resilience, and longing for restoration. I'll just say it in a nutshell. What I'll try to show or demonstrate are names that we find for the first time in the Al Yehudu tablets or Marshu tablets from the Babylonian exile and further on, and also found in the biblical passages more or less from this period for the first time and on. The significance of these names is particularly evident in the genealogy found in 1 Chronicles, which reflects the list of names of the royal family, giving the most detailed description of the house of David after the exile. And here you can see the descendants from the period of the exile, and we won't go through all the names, and I also don't have a lot to say about every single name, but the ones that are involved is what I'm going to look at. This genealogy provides a glimpse into the world of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, who the biblical texts say was exiled to Babylonia after reigning in Judah for just 3 months, a decade before the destruction of the first temple. The names he gave his sons, who were based on the fact that the list does not appear in the book of Kings, and that he was young when he was taken to Babylonia, were likely, and I don't have proof for this, all born in exile, may reveal his inner world. The name Asir, meaning captive, reflects the reality of the community imprisonment in Babylonia, despite their favorable status. Shaltiel, I have asked of God, expresses a turn towards God rather than the Babylonian deities. Malkiram, my king is exalted, evokes the question of kingship. Who is truly exalted, the Babylonian king or God? While praising the Babylonian king, it could also be imprinted as expressing for a hope for God's exaltation over earthly rulers. I'm not going to talk about the fact that the name itself is Phoenician. It was discussed in articles that came out discussing this specific name. Finally, names like Pedaiah, God redeems, and Zerubbabel, born in Babylonia, and Raphael, Yahweh is the healer, all convey a hope for redemption and a plea for the deliverance from exile. It should be noted that several individuals in Al Yehudu tablets bear a variant of the name, for instance, Raphael, right, Raphael. It is also known from 1 Chronicles 4:42 and 7:2, illustrating the continuity of Judean naming traditions across biblical and Babylonian contexts. These names, along with others from the next generation, likely born before the construction of the Second Temple, provide valuable insights to the exile's theological worldview. The same pattern evident in biblical texts is reflected in extra-biblical sources, such as the Judean exile documents from Al Yehudu. Some of those mentioned in the tablets can be identified as Judean. Many of the names have Yahwistic elements or otherwise connect to Judean tradition, like Chagai or Shabtai. Here, names like Shaltiel, Pedaiah, Shechaniah, Hananiah, and Shabtai appear mirroring those found in biblical texts. Through these names, we can glimpse aspects of the exile's changing world, particularly since some names are not commonly recognized in biblical tradition before the Persian period. Moreover, parallels drawn from extra-biblical documents help expand our understanding of the exiles' theological attitudes. Specific names that appear both in biblical texts and extra-biblical sources can be instructive. Nonetheless, the scope of this phenomena remains uncertain. And I said, first, the biblical genealogical lists are often disrupted and difficult to interpret, and making it hard to determine when these lists were compiled. Second, much of the information of the extra-biblical sources is unpublished, leaving the frequency and significance of these names in obscurity. In what follows, several case studies of individual names will illustrate how these animistic patterns shed light on the exiles' world and their strategies for negotiating identity in the Persian period. This name I actually discussed sitting in Wayne's class 2 years ago, and the paper at the end of the year. So the case of Paltiyahu. The name Paltiyahu, meaning God has delivered or God caused to escape, is first mentioned in the book of Ezekiel in that way, specifically in Ezekiel 11:1 and 11:13, where Paltiyahu is portrayed as a significant figure among the people's leaders during the prophetic visions preceding the destruction of the first temple. This positioning underscores a critical moment in Jerusalem history, highlighting both divine judgment and impending catastrophe. Further references to Paltiyahu appear in post-exilic texts, reflecting the name's enduring relevance. In Nehemiah 10:23, Paltiyahu is listed among those who sealed a covenant, indicating his role in the post-exilic community's efforts toward religious and social restoration. Chronicle gives the name Paltiyahu twice in the genealogical context, which one we saw before, and it links it to the Davidic lineage, emphasizing the continuity with the royal caste, while Chronicles 1:442 portrays a Paltiyahu, leader of the Samanites. The repeated use of the name Paltiyahu and other names sharing the root Palat, like Paltiel, Pelet, and Palti, which appear across various periods, underscores their significant historical usage. These names often imply notions of deliverance, themes that resonate deeply with the experiences and narratives of the biblical figures who bear them. In biblical context, Paltiyahu occurs in scenarios tied closely to themes of survival, reflecting an emphasis on preservation and continuation. Thus, during the King Chizkiah's region in 2 Kings 19, the survival of the remnant in Jerusalem symbolizes divine protection and hope for restoration. Jeremiah 25:35 speaks of the escape of survivors from Palamites prophesied against the shepherds and leaders of the people, emphasizing the theme of deliverance. Additionally, Ezekiel 14:22 highlights survivors emerging from Jerusalem, showing the continuation of life and despite destruction. In Ezra 9:8 and 9:13-15, the term captures a moment of divine mercy, while the remnant permitted to escape despite the community's sins. These references collectively underscore the profound resonance of the name Paltiyahu in the period marked by exilic return, reflecting a persistent hope and divine commitment to the nation's preservation. It is worth noting that there is some debate regarding the uniqueness and significance of the name of Paltiyahu in contrast to related names like Paltiel, Pelet, Palti, and Elipelet, which appear in earlier biblical sources. While some may view this as a phonetic variation, I suggest that the reoccurrence of these names, particularly with those consistent use of divine elements like Yah and Yahu, typically at the end, suggest a deliberate linguistic evolution rather than a random occurrence. This pattern, especially prominent in text of from Ezekiel to Chronicles, and concentrated around and after the destruction of the temple, may point to a broader shift in naming conventions between the exilic and post-exilic periods. The shift mirrors the community's evolving understanding of identity and divine interaction in the aftermath of national trauma during periods of recovery and rebuilding. The name embodies a symbol of hope and divine providence that aligns with the themes of survival and restoration prevalent in the post-exilic literature. The name Paltiyahu, although rooted in the Hebrew language, appears prominently in the biblical corpus, but is also found in extra-biblical records from Judean diaspora in Mesopotamia. These cases offer a snapshot of the cultural and linguistic continuity maintained by Judean communities far from their homeland. In the late 7th century BCE extra-biblical sources, the name Paltiya surfaces in Assyrian documents, indicating its clearly adoption or concurrent use outside of the land of Israel. For example, in a reference from 700 BC, identifies a witness named Paltiya in a pottery transition involving a Samaritan in the regions of Guzan and Ashur. This mention, among the earliest, underscores the Judean exiles' integration into a wider economic life of the Assyrian Empire, and the fact that they preserved distinct names and the fact that they preserved distinct naming traditions. The evaluation of the name's orthography in subsequent records from Assyria and Babylonia reflects adaptations to local dialects and writing systems. By the mid-6th century BCE, in the heart of the Babylonian territory, at Al Yehudu, the name appears as Paltiyawa, and at Al Yehudu sources link to the bearer and to the familiar and communal Judean activities. This continuity attests to the name's consistent use among exiles, tying the community's cultural heritage to its ancestral roots, even in displacement. Further appearances from Al Yehudu and Nippur in 477 BCE and 442 BCE show the name Paltiya is in contexts that range from economic transactions to witness land purchases. Stopler published those. The consistent appearances of the name and its variants in recordings spanning over 250 years here illustrates not just a linguistic artifact, but a deliberate preservation of identity through name culture. And the use of Paltiya in the Judean diaspora serves as a testament reflecting broader naming patterns among the Judean in Babylonia, and underscores how displaced communities cling to identity markers such as names. The case of Shaltiel. The name Shaltiel, which means I have asked of God, occupies a significant position within the post-exilic period, as evident in the various biblical texts like Ezra, Chronicles, and the prophetic writings. This name is intricately linked with the royal linkage of David, which we saw also before, and the priestly lines after the Babylonian exile, highlighting its importance in the narratives of leadership and the genealogies of Jewish community returning from Babylonia. And we saw, for example, in 1 Chronicles 3:17, that situates Shaltiel within the lineage of the King David, emphasizing his role in the restoration of the royal and priestly duties and the priestly post-exilic duties. Similarly, Nehemiah 12:1 refers to a Shaltiel in the context of reestablishing communal and religious practices in Jerusalem. The name is consistently presented across multiple biblical texts as part of provider lineage in the post-exilic community. The most well-known Shaltiel is the father of Zerubbabel, who is repeatedly identified right in Haggai and Zerubbabel, the appointed leader of the Judean people, a symbolic successor to Davidic kingship at the time, when no king ruled in Judah. Ezra 3:2 and 3:8 further emphasize Zerubbabel's role in rebuilding the altar and laying foundations for the Second Temple. Taken together, these references highlight Shaltiel's significance as a genealogical link between the exilic past and the restored future, and underscore how lineage functioned as a marker of both continuity and authority in the post-exilic period. The name Shaltiel is found in Al Yehudu between years 552 and 520 BCE. Al Yehudu also references individuals such as Dana, son of Shaltiel, from the mid-6th to early 5th century BCE, which attests to the use of the name in broader Mesopotamian context during the period. Kathleen Abraham, has pointed out to the occurrences of the name Shaltiel before the exilic period, suggesting its use across different regions and times, indicative of its broader cultural and theological relevance. This notion is supported by the economic roles of the familial connections of individuals named Shaltiel in Al Yehudu tablets. Discussions by scholars like Astola, Abraham, and especially Wunsch have examined the social and economic position of the Shaltiel family in Babylonia, illuminating the complexities of the exilic community life and the multi-fascinated identities maintained by Judean living away from their homeland. These naming patterns thus offer critical insights into the resilience and adaptability of the people navigating foreign rule without relinquishing their foundational narratives. The next name is actually the one that I published with Jan in an article, so I'm going to skip this page, and whoever wants can take a look at the published articles where we, where did we publish it? I don't remember where we published it.
Is that Shabtaya's syllabic?
So it's a whole conversation,
Yeah,
but I'll
okay.
just say that it first comes up in the biblical period in
It's always
Nehemiah,
syllabic, yes,
and
it's
then
always
in
written syllabically.
wait, yeah. So one second, it just comes up in the biblical period.
I'll ask you later.
Yeah, in the biblical period, and you can. What's interesting about this name is I think it's twofold. Is the first thing that it surfaces in the same time in the biblical and extra biblical text, but I think what's more substantial to my mind, and it's just a suggestion that you can see Nehemiah arguing over preserving the Shabbat when this name surfaces, and so there's this theological strong component here. Maybe Janice? I don't remember where we sent it. Anyway, so that was Shabtai. I'll end up saying that there are more examples. We can talk about Pdaya, which is also a name like Padiyawa that surfaces in the post-exilic period, and again, the same timing we see also in the biblical passages. Hananiah, and there are more examples that are harder sometimes to determine exactly when they first surface in the biblical text because there's so much conversation about the different texts. But I'm going to jump to the conclusion. I'll say that, I'll start a little bit back. In sum, the preservation of Judean identity through personal names was vital and makes it possible for us to track continuity of Judeans in Babylonian and Persian period texts. Both biblical and extra-biblical sources show how Judean names during the Babylonian exile reflect a blend of continuity and change with cultural and religious identity. New names emerged during this period, many of which do not appear in earlier biblical records. The analysis of the names, such as Paltiya, Shaltiel, across biblical and extra-biblical sources, sheds light on the exilic and post-exilic community theological mindset. Paltiya, found in texts from Ezekiel to Chronicles, symbolizes survival and divine protection, a theme resonating with post-exilic literature. Similarly, Shaltiel, linked to the Davidic lineage, highlights the restoration of royal and priestly duties after the exile. The reoccurrence of these names in both biblical texts and Mesopotamian documents, like those of Al-Yehudu, indicates the continuity of Judean identity despite geographical displacement. The Judeans in exile across the empire appear to have struggled with their identity. Names given to their children, found in biblical text and extra-biblical sources at the same periods, reflect the negotiation of their status and position after the First Temple's destruction. Thus, Judeans, while clearly carving out a place for themselves within the Persian Empire, still maintained a distinct identity that was tied to their origins, underscoring the multifaceted nature of Judean life under Persian rule. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, we'll take one or two questions before we break. Would anyone like to raise questions, issues, concerns? I see that people have been defeated by the hour and the heat, but we'll take Matthew and Jan in that order, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks so much for your paper. Interesting to see the appearance of those names in the exilic documents. I was just like, I'm curious to hear you reflect on how much you can derive from a name in terms of theological outlook, and what you suggest in terms of checks and balances around, let's say, over-theologizing names, and how you've wrestled with that
It's
question.
an excellent question. I obviously spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I'll say this. I'll say two different answers. One is that I'm very minimalistic in what we can learn from the Al-Yehudu texts about the Judean, I wouldn't even call it theology, I would say their traditions they preserved or the life, the way they lived. I think that all we can basically say has to do with the names and the canonic status, their status. So having that said, I try to maximize what we can do with names, and I'll say that I don't think the names can stand alone, meaning it has to be something that contributes to what I would suggest to be, I guess, a multi-perspective, meaning since I also have the biblical sources, which I don't rely on as, you know, the truth and the historical evidence, but they do give me a perspective, at least of some kind of prophets or some kind of notion that was going on. And I have these texts, and they add to the names, and they surface at the same time. So I think putting that together can work, and I'm saying it very cautiously, so if you're asking specifically here, if I would only be able to come up with one or two names that surfaced in this time, I would say it's coincidental. But if you can see 5 or 6, and they all are names that have a meaning in Hebrew, meaning like, I want to come back, I want to be redeemed, I see myself still as part of the community I left behind, then putting the facts together, that there are a bunch of names, and that we have different ways to complement our story and to see it from different perspectives, I think it works. I'll give one example. The Sabbath name that I was struggling with is an example of a place where if we didn't also have elephantine sources, I would say that just using the biblical texts and Al Yehudu texts, or Marashu texts, or texts, Akkadian, cuneiform texts is still pushing it. But I think there, where we also have this name surfacing at the same time in Egypt, then we already have something that's, to my mind, that's a little bit more possible. Still, it's, you know, it's a possibility. It can be pushed back, and I didn't take it personally.
To this, I would also add the Yao and Yashuv Tzedek names that I've spoken about other times, and that we spoke a little bit about at the museum yesterday. Jan.
A question for Yigal. So I looked at the Gerema tablet, and my question that I had for myself that I couldn't really answer is how much can we consider the Ema ending to actually be realistic, because it's the only example of it written like that out of over like 500 examples. And that's my problem I had with it. So I was...
Yeah, it is a bit problematic, but this is also the first Yama name which we see in Babylonian tablets, because that's not yet established.
Okay.
It's commonly taken as Yahwistic. I don't see why not. But
Okay, I would also point out, Yigal, is it important here that the R colors the R colors the E vowel?
Yeah, but you have it...
we have this phenomenon of that diphthong contraction earlier in Old Babylonian, but that's unrelated. Yeah.
Okay.